Okay, let's unpack this deep dive. We have a truly fascinating stack of sources for today. These are excerpts from Aristotle's Politics.
A foundational text really gets into the weeds on how societies work, or maybe why they sometimes don't work.
Exactly. And we're looking at your source material here. So the mission is to explore these, well, ancient ideas about government, citizenship, the good life.
Directly from Aristotle's perspective, we want to pull out the core insights, the big takeaways from these excerpts.
It's complex stuff, definitely, but we'll guide you through it. We'll touch on the state, who gets to be a citizen, different kinds of government, why they become unstable.
And what Aristotle thought was the best path, practically speaking.
All right, so let's jump in. Where does he even begin? What is the state or the city for Aristotle?
Right, the polis. It's not just a place people live. For him, it's a community, a partnership that aims at the highest good.
The highest good, meaning.
Happiness, essentially, or living well. That's the ultimate goal.
So it's different from, say, a family or a village.
Yeah, those are necessary too. They meet basic needs. You might form a village just to survive. But the city, the state, it's founded to live, sure, but it continues so that people can live happily. It's the final and perfect form of community.
The end and perfection of government, as he puts it in the source.
Exactly. And he sees it as natural too. Humans are political animals, meant for this kind of communal life.
Okay, so the state exists for this higher purpose, living well. Who gets to participate fully? Who is the citizen? This part is pretty striking today.
It really is. His definition is very much about political function. A citizen is someone who shares in the, let's see, the judicial and executive aspects of governing.
So holding office or serving in the courts.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Someone who can participate in judgment and ruling. He does say the definition might shift a bit depending on the specific constitution, the type of government.
Right.
But then he outlines who, in what he calls well-regulated states, would not typically be a citizen. And this is where you see a big difference from modern ideas.
Who does he exclude?
Well, mechanics, artisans, hired laborers.
Wait, so if you worked with your hands, a craftsman, a farmer maybe, you weren't really a citizen in his ideal. Why?
His reasoning, coming from the source material you shared, is that their kind of work. Well, he didn't see it as noble or virtuous enough. He implies it doesn't allow for the leisure or the development of character needed for political participation and achieving true happiness through civic virtue.
It sounds like he thinks you need a certain amount of free time and a certain kind of life to even be capable of citizenship.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He even notes that historically in some places, these roles were filled by slaves or foreigners. Citizenship for him is tied directly to active participation in governing, not just birth or residence.
That's a fundamental difference.
And it leads right into how he thinks about rulers and the ruled.
The relationship between them. He sees a kind of natural distinction, like the soul ruling the body.
Yes, he uses that analogy. But, and this is really important, he draws a very sharp line between different types of rule.
How so?
Ruling within a household, a master over a slave, husband over wife, parent over child. That's one thing. Political rule is different.
Because
Political rule, ideally, happens among free and equal persons. It's not based on the same kind of inherent hierarchy you might find in a family structure, according to his view.
So among equals, how does that work?
The ideal is that citizens should be able to rule and be ruled by turns. There's a reciprocity there.
Okay, a rotation of roles. And does that mean the virtues needed are different too?
Exactly. He argues a ruler needs, well, complete moral virtue. But others, depending on their role, like the ruled citizen, or even, in his framework, a wife or a slave, they only need enough virtue for their specific function.
So virtue isn't one size fits all. It depends on your position.
Right. It's a hierarchical view of virtue tied to social and political roles. This whole framework really sets up his classification of governments, which is probably one of the most famous parts of the politics.
Yeah, everyone learns this one. Ruled by one, few, or many.
That's the basic structure. But the crucial part, the key distinction for Aristotle, isn't just the number. It's about who benefits.
Right. Is the government working for the common good or just for the rulers?
Precisely. The ones aiming for the common good are the regular or correct forms.
Which are?
Kingly rule or monarchy, if it's one virtuous ruler. Aristocracy, if it's a few virtuous rulers. And polity, or what he sometimes calls a free state, if it's the many ruling for the common good.
Okay, those are the good ones. What about the bad ones, the perversions?
Those are when the rulers govern for their own private interest. So tyranny is the perversion of monarchy. Oligarchy is the perversion of aristocracy, usually meaning rule by the wealthy few for their own benefit.
And the last one.
And democracy is the perversion of polity, typically meaning rule by the poor masses in their own interest, potentially disregarding the common good or the wealthy minority.
It's interesting he puts democracy there, even calling it the least bad of the perversions.
Yeah, he sees tyranny as the absolute worst, the most contrary to a good state, than oligarchy. Democracy is flawed, in his view,
Yeah.
often unstable, but less fundamentally unjust than the other two perversions.
This connects to his ideas about justice and equality, doesn't it? The tension there.
It absolutely does. He talks about how political conflict often arises from different ideas of justice. People argue about equality.
Two kinds, right?
Yes, numerical equality, where everyone just counts as one, equal shares for all, and proportional equality, where shares are distributed based on merit or worth or contribution.
And different systems lean on these differently.
Right. Democracies often emphasize numerical equality among citizens. Oligarchies tend to base claims on proportional equality, usually linked to wealth or noble birth.
And Aristotle thinks.
He thinks basing government entirely on either principle is a mistake and leads to instability. Pure numerical equality ignores differences in virtue or contribution. Pure proportional equality, especially based just on wealth, ignores the claims of the free poor. Real political justice needs to consider both, depending on the context.
That makes sense. You need a balance.
Ignoring one side just fuels resentment and eventually revolution or sedition.
So before analyzing actual states too deeply, he also looks at some theoretical proposals, like Plato's ideas.
Oh yeah, he dedicates a good bit of time to critiquing Plato's Republic, especially the idea of holding wives, children, and property in common.
And he's not a fan.
Not at all. He has some very practical objections, for instance, common children and wives. He thinks that just dilutes affection. What belongs to everybody ends up being cared for by nobody. People care most for what's their own.
And common property.
Similar issues. He predicts conflict because people will inevitably feel they're working harder than others but getting the same reward.
The free rider problem, basically.
Sort of, yeah. Plus, he argues it takes away two important things. The simple pleasure people get from owning things, and perhaps more importantly, the opportunity to practice the virtue of liberality or generosity.
You can't be generous if you don't own anything to give away.
Exactly. So for Aristotle, private property isn't just practical. It's actually necessary for certain virtues. He suggests a system of private ownership, but with common use encouraged through custom and law, is better. It gets the advantage of both.
Practical and virtuous. So grounding things in reality seems important to him. Does he then look at actual governments?
He does. The sources you provided mention his analysis of places like Sparta, Crete, and Carthage. He examines their constitutions.
Does he praise them?
He finds things to praise and criticize. Even Sparta, which was often admired, he criticizes for things like the way they treated women, which he thought weakened the state, and the power of officials called ephors who could be easily bribed. Also, senators holding office for life, potentially becoming stagnant.
So, not a perfect model. What about Carthage?
He seems more impressed with Carthage. He thought it was well-balanced, stable, the people had a voice. He even noted a clever, if maybe ethically dubious, practice they had. In their sort of oligarchy, they sometimes appointed popular figures from wealthy families to offices where they could make money. This kept the populace happy, preventing unrest, even though Aristotle noted it relied a bit on chance finding the right people.
Interesting workaround. So, studying these real examples helps him understand stability and instability, which is a big topic for him, right? Why states collapse.
Absolutely. Sedition and revolution. He identifies the root causes. We already mentioned inequality, that feeling of injustice regarding numerical versus proportional shares. It's huge.
What else?
Desire for profit or honor, fear, arrogance, or contempt from rulers, disproportionate growth of one part of the state, election intrigues, even small, seemingly trivial things like family quarrels that escalate.
He gives examples too, right? From the sources.
Yeah, like disputes over inheritances in places like Mytilene or Phocaea spiraling into civil war, or a military victory suddenly empowering the common soldiers, leading to demands for more democracy, like in Syracuse.
Demagogues stirring up trouble between rich and poor.
That's a classic cause, he points out. And sometimes it's infighting among the ruling elite themselves in an oligarchy, like in Cnidus, that brings the system down. Change can be sudden or gradual.
So if those are the causes, what about prevention? How do you preserve a government?
Well, the fundamental principle is pretty straightforward. The part of the population that supports the existing constitution must be stronger, collectively, than those who want to change it.
Keeping the balance of power.
Essentially, yes. And then he offers specific advice for different types, for democracies, for example.
What does he suggest?
Things like making sure officials are drawn from the whole community, maybe using lottery for some posts to widen participation. Crucially, paying the poor to attend assemblies so they can actually afford to participate.
That's quite progressive in a way. But also,
Also, protecting the wealthy minority. Don't confiscate their property or redistribute wealth too aggressively, because that just pushes them towards trying to overthrow the democracy.
so avoiding extremes and trying to prevent demagogues from splitting everyone into warring camps?
Exactly. For oligarchies, he suggests giving the common people some role, maybe in a council, so they feel included. Having checks on power, like committees that review proposals before they go to the main body.
And what about oaths?
Ah, yes. He notes some oligarchs swore oaths against the people. He says oaths should be sworn for the common good, not to oppress a segment of the population.
So general advice is know your system, know what threatens it, and try to keep things balanced. Avoid extreme inequality.
That's a key takeaway. Too much inequality, or even enforcing equality too rigidly where it's not appropriate, creates pressure that can break the system.
Okay, so after looking at all these flawed or unstable systems, does he propose an ideal or maybe a best practical system?
Yes, he does. This is where he argues strongly for what he calls the middle state, a state where the middle class holds the balance of power. He thinks this the most stable and generally the best attainable government for most societies,
The middle class, why them specifically?
because they avoid the problems of the extremes. The very rich, he claims, are often arrogant, unwilling to obey laws, only knowing how to rule despotically. The very poor can be, in his words, too degraded by hardship, too easily led, and only know how to obey like slaves.
So the middle class is more reasonable.
They are more likely to follow reason, less likely to engage in factional strife. They don't excessively envy the rich, nor are they despised by the poor. They can be good rulers and good subjects. They mediate between the extremes.
And he points to famous lawgivers, Solon like Kyrgyz, as coming from this middle rank.
He suggests they often did, or at least favored, this kind of moderate setup. It's very grounded in his observations of human psychology and social dynamics.
And this connects back to the ultimate goal, right? The good life.
Always. The best state is the one that best allows its citizens to live virtuously and happily. The middle-class polity, being stable and moderate, provides the best conditions for that, generally speaking.
He keeps hammering home that the happiest life requires virtue, plus some necessary external goods.
Right. And he touches on that age-old debate. Is the best life the active political one or the quiet, contemplative, philosophical one?
What's his take?
He values both, but argues that the true aim of the legislator, the goal of the state itself, shouldn't just be power or war or economic success. It should be creating the conditions for rest and peace.
Rest in peace. That sounds passive.
Not exactly passive. It means the leisure necessary for virtuous activity, including contemplation and noble actions in peacetime. He criticizes states like Sparta that are totally geared towards war, because when peace comes, they don't know how to use it virtuously. They collapse inwardly.
So peace and leisure are for practicing virtue.
Exactly, which leads directly to the massive importance he places on education.
Ah, yes. This seems critical for him.
Absolutely crucial.
Wow.
Education is key to preserving the state, any state, because it shapes citizens to fit the Constitution. It's also essential for making good men who can live that virtuous life.
And it has to be public, not private.
He insists on it. Education must be a common concern, regulated by law. You can't leave the shaping of future citizens to individual parental choice because the whole community has a stake in the outcome. The goal is shared virtue.
And he distinguishes types of education.
Yes, there's education for necessary, perhaps mean tasks, and then there's liberal education for free men, focused on developing the mind and character virtue.
And music sits in here somehow, surprisingly.
Very much so. He sees music as far more than just entertainment. It shapes character, trains emotions, helps people to rejoice rightly, feel pleasure and pain correctly, and it's crucial for the proper virtuous use of that leisure, that rest we talked about.
Different kinds of music for different purposes.
Yes. He discusses how certain modes or harmonies, like the Doric, are good for education and building fortitude, while others, like the Lydian, might be more suited for relaxation or expressing certain emotions, maybe even for spectacle. It's about its effect on the soul.
That's a fascinating perspective on music's civic role. Does he mention other practical things for the ideal state?
Briefly in these excerpts, yes. Things like city size, big enough for self-sufficiency, but small enough for citizens to know each other's character, which is important for elections and justice.
Sensible. Anything else?
Location, access to water, defensive walls, even the layout, like separating the commercial marketplace from the public square where citizens exercise and engage in politics.
He even gets into family life specific.
Yeah, like ideal marriage ages. He suggests around 18 for women, maybe 37 for men. His reasoning relates to producing healthy children and ensuring the generations overlap appropriately for stability and knowledge transfer.
Wow. Okay, that covers a huge amount of ground from Aristotle's Politics, all drawn from the sources you gave us. From the purpose of the state to who's a citizen, why governments fail, the best practical model, and the vital role of education.
It really shows the depth of his analysis. He's tackling questions about how we organize ourselves that are, well, it's still incredibly relevant, trying to figure out what makes a community function well and allows people to flourish.
And hopefully, this deep dive has given you some real aha moments, pulling these key ideas directly from the source material you wanted us to explore.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something Aristotle really emphasizes. He argues that while good laws and structure are important, it's ultimately the education and the morals of the citizens, fostered by the state, that are the most critical factor in having a good government and good lives. The culture shapes the Constitution as much as the Constitution shapes the culture.
So he kind of leaves you with a question. How much does your society, your laws, your culture prioritize shaping citizens for virtue and the common good? Something to think about long after this deep dive.